And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another edition of Thursday Night Cinema. I'll be bringing my co-host on here in just a minute. Want to thank everybody for coming out and watching. Make sure you go and hit that like and subscribe button. Let us know how we're doing on the channel. Last week we did a great show. We talked about the first season of The Wheel of Time, gave our critique and talked about it, and that was a fun time. But tonight we're going to be talking some 1980s, and I'm talking the 1980 film Hawk the Slayer. So we'll just wait on Vern to get going, and then we'll be breaking down this week's movie of choice. Going. Like I said, hope everybody's having a wonderful night. They survived the cold and storms, supposedly, that we had last night. All right, and welcome. And he's got it on in the background. Welcome to Thursday Night Cinema. I'm your host, Dash. This is your other host, Vern. And tonight we'll be talking about one of the cheesiest but fantastic movies of the 1980s. Sword and Sorcery films, filmed in Britain, starring John Terry and Jack Palance.
Yep.
These are two brothers fighting, or one Voltan, that's Jack Palance. He wants the family power. Dad won't give it to him, and as you can see right there behind Vern, he's getting ready to take care of Dad. But goes on, they're fighting over a girl. You know, it's the typical sword and sorcery stuff of the 1980s. And I love everything about this cheesiness, and we're going to get going here in just a minute. So what did you think so far?
I actually remember watching this like multiple times when I was a kid. My dad had it on VHS. And for those of you all don't know, movies used to come on these giant rectangle cassettes that we had to shove into a machine to get to play movies. So, yeah, it was. I mean, it was just as cheesy as it was then, you know. But it was fun to watch it again. Jack Palance has got one of the. He's got one of those Hollywood voices that you won't, you know, ever forget. You know, Billy D. Williams, James Earl Jones. You know, Jack Palance. You know, he's got that recognizable and awesome movie voice. So a lot of overacting, you know, full of overacting.
The deep. And definitely overacting, and we'll get to that. Yeah, this movie was deadpan at first by a lot of people. I mean,
yep.
Deadpan. Didn't do very well, but over the years, it has picked up a cult following, if you will. And some of the things that I learned while I was, you know, watching and doing some research for the movie, 2000 AD, the comic that puts out Judge Dredd, the comic company that puts out Judge Dredd and those, are bringing Hawk the Slayer back in comic form. So we might get another movie down the road. Who knows?
They tried to crowdfund a Kickstarter movie in 2007 for a sequel.
Yeah.
So
yeah, a lot of the sequels have definitely failed on this. But hey, with more crowdsourcing, more comic books, and maybe getting some love for this movie will help us get either a remake and or a sequel of some sort. All right, let's get into it. What did you like the most about this film?
So when you watch this, like, you can remember all of the cheesy movies, you know. You can't call them all cheesy because back then we were all like, wow, like when his sword flies, you're a kid, you're just like, oh my God, that's so cool. You watch it now, you're like, y'all got to do better, you know. But it just reminded me of everything, you know. Dragon Slayer. What was it? There was another one similar to this. It was like the Sorcerer and the Stone, or the Stone and the Sorcerer. Yep. Yeah. The Sword and the Sorcerer. Cull. You know, just the nostalgia of the movie is great.
Yeah, I think obviously for the people out there watching this was light years ahead of Lord of the Rings and
And in a time where people kind of look down on sword and the sorcery type movies, like you said, we had Sword and the Sorcerer, Kroll, things of that nature, and this was kind of in that time frame where people were, if you like this type of movie, they thought you were kind of, devil worshiping and things of that nature. So,
Yeah.
but man, what I love most is, and it is and it is the cheesiness of the movie. It
Yeah.
was a low budget. You could tell they did everything in England, in the woods, and it was just great. But what I like is there were some certain special effects that were kind of ahead of their time, a little bit ahead of their time, or they were just, certain things that we hadn't seen in some of the 70s movies that we got, and things of that nature. But it was the first, I think what I love most about it, for me, for the most part, was this was the first time, and by this time I'm almost 8 years old. I've already read The Hobbit
Yeah.
and Lord of the Rings. So this was my first actual getting to see, uh, you know, fantasy characters, dwarves, giants, elves, and things like that. And I think that's what I love about this movie, because before then, you rarely, other than cartoons, like you had certain cartoons where you got these things, but you never got, at least for me, the live action fantasy characters brought to life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a true statement. And it's interesting you bring up the whole looking down on it, because that was a thing, like in the 80s and 90s, you didn't want to tell anybody you read, fantasy books. You didn't want to tell anybody you played D&D. You didn't want to tell anybody anything like that, because it was so tied to devil worshiping, man, that it just kind of made you feel weird and kind of almost like an outcast to even talk about it. So
absolutely. And some of these characters, believe it or not, some of the actors you've probably seen, obviously Jack Palance, but the head character, John Terry's been in Lost. He's been in the 24. He was the I believe it was Kate's dad. He was the one that ran the business, and her sister's the one that ended up betraying her and being the terrorist with the terror cell. So he was in 24. So all these characters we have seen.
Full Metal Jacket.
It's just hard to know. What did you like least about this?
What I liked least is, so this was made around the time, Star Trek was doing this thing, and they made the elf in this movie so much like Spock. It was, I mean, it just, I was like, come, you got to do better, like it's, I mean, the ears, the personality, like it was like Spock shooting arrows,
Yeah.
So it's a stark difference from, you brought up Lord of the Rings, Legolas, like completely different, so.
Yeah, that is kind of what I brought up. Some of the I mean, again, we're talking 80s, and the acting was a little stiff, obviously, and with Crow, especially with Crow, who you were talking about, it was just very talking, almost like a robot in certain aspects. What I did love about Crow, though, this dude was, obviously movie magic, but he was still pretty badass with the shooting the arrows and the bow, and it was, again, just to see elves brought to life. But yeah, I agree that some of the acting and especially with Voltan Son Drogo,
Goodness.
so stiff and so bland. But yeah, I think that's what I like least, was some of the acting was a little stiff. But overall, the story, even the storyline was good. Especially, if you've read any fantasy, and if you read any comic book, it's always the brother against brother, and we're fighting over the woman, and
even though she's dead, you know what I mean? Like, but I mean, that was the storyline back in the day. Like, it was, you're either fighting for the girl, you were fighting to avenge the girl, or you're fighting to save the girl. So
I mean, because I don't want to, I mean, because it is cheap. I mean, cinema du fromage is so. I mean, you gotta have cheesy films. You got to, and this is to me one of the best cheesy films ever. Who was the best character portrayed in your mind?
I think the giant.
Yeah, Gort.
I think, yeah, I just seemed he just seemed like the most natural of them. You know, the sorceress was like whispering and just, you know, trying to see with her little eye patch,
Yeah.
you know, with the eye on it and everything, just trying to see mysterious. You know, it's a toss up between him and the dwarf. Those two just seem like they adapted to their roles the best to me.
That was the best dynamic of the film as far as you know, because obviously Hawk is, you know, they're going to have this big battle, so Hawk has to go and recruit the giant, the elf, the dwarf, and as long with the other guy they meet up with
the hula hoop teleporter.
Yeah, I got to give it to you. Gort and the dwarf are just so fantastic. They're dynamic. So the dwarf could, you know, cheat him out of food and everything, and sit there. And the eyeballs, the eyeball scene was great, where he says, "I'm eating eyeballs," and it's just really just hen eggs. So yeah, I think my best character is Gort, and to an extent, I do like Jack Palance Voltan. You know, I mean, even though he's a little overacting, he still nails the bad guy and the voice, and you got to give it to him.
But he's known. I mean, I feel like he's known for taking his characters over the top. I think the last thing I saw him, I remember seeing him in, was Tango and Cash, and even then he was, you know, he was over the top then. So
yeah, even in Batman, even you are my number one, and yeah. Jack Palance was always the great bad guy, and just that's the way he was, over the top, but you loved him. And even as Curly in City Slickers, man, you gotta love him, and so many good roles for him, man. Who was the worst character in your opinion?
The worst character, I think, what's his name? Handless guy.
Fennel, yeah.
Yeah, between him or it's between him or the Hunchback, man. Like the he was just it was awful. I mean, from the moment you see him, he's, you know, eating and spitting everywhere. It's I'm just like, this dude is. You want to talk about horrible overacting? That's I'm gonna give it to the Hunchback.
Yeah, I did like the hammer dropping on his head, but that's probably the best acting you did. I don't know. I think for me it was Drogo. I mean, Drogo was the worst character. I mean, he didn't really add anything to the story other than to kind of just tell, you know, Voltan where Hawk was. But
it was like somebody
I think Drogo was just not needed, and he could have been any of his henchmen to do exactly what Drogo did. I guess they just wanted to have a son. But between Drogo and the Hunchback, but again, I mean, you gotta have the stereotypical you know, fantasy characters, whether it be the Hunchback and or giants and things of that nature. So
who wasn't Hunchback, mind you? The dude wasn't Hunchback at all.
No, he wasn't at all. Not at all. You know, just kind of the witch was kind of. I mean, I like the witch, but her confetti stringy shot there at the end where she shoots the funny string, the silly string out of her. Again, I mean, we're talking like you've done so good with some of your effects up until that point, and then right there you're going to shoot silly string out.
And then
cover somebody
after that, you got the long tube firing the glowing marbles into the room.
So I mean, it's good, but it's good for what it is, folks. If you're watching, I mean, it really is good for what it is.
Yeah.
And these are, again, minor nitpicks, because I will watch this movie over and over and over again every year, as many times as I can. What surprised you most about this movie, though?
What surprised me the most is how am I supposed to say this? There is no color in this movie. I mean, not not
sold.
any.
Yeah.
You know, I was watching. I watched it, and I was like, man, I for some reason I remember the elf being a black guy, and then when I saw him, I was like, no, you're probably mixing this dude up with the guy in The Witcher, because that was like the last shot. I was just, you know, it doesn't take away from the movie or anything. It just reminds me of the time. Like there wasn't very much color on the screen, you know. And that's what surprised me the most, just to see, you know, especially after now, you know, with everybody and everything, just looking back. And yeah, that was nothing. Again, doesn't change the movie or anything. It just surprised me. Like you can forget as, you know, time goes on how different things were.
Absolutely.
And this was a reminder. So not a bad surprise, not a good surprise, just a surprise. Like,
yeah. I think for me, and we just kind of talked about it, it was like some of the what surprised me was some of the special effects, the way that they would do the bow and arrow and Crow shooting, and the rapid fire of his crossbow.
yeah.
And now some of it was cheesy as well, you know, but I think what surprised me the most was that, you know, for the time it was, you know, we got for me, a relatively good fantasy movie.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Yeah, without a doubt.
horrible by any means, at least, you know, even today's standards, you know, it's something I go back and watch. Now, so other people are probably going to disagree with us and disagree with me, but I think that's what surprised me the most. And to I mean, this was like, again, just like we talked about, at a time when looking and watching these types of films, you were looked down upon. So it was really good.
Yeah.
If this movie, because we just talked about it, and maybe they'll do it. And obviously you could tell at the end of this movie that they were wanting to do a sequel.
Yeah.
By taking his body and things of that nature, and Gort and Hawk riding off to do another adventure with the witch. If this was remade today,
Ooh.
with today's, you know, standards and CGI, whatever we have, special effects, would you love it as much, or would you deadpan it?
I would have to say it would have to depend on the product. So because you have better technology and everything, doesn't mean the product you put out is going to be better. A perfect example, in my opinion, would be the two Judge Dredd movies.
Yes.
I like the first one. They remade it. I like the second one. I thought they were both good movies. Batman, you know, you quoted Palace from Batman. You take the Batman from then to, you know, the Dark Knight, or even Ben Affleck's Batman, and they're all good, and they all have their significance in the place and time.
Right.
So yeah, I would watch it. It just depends on the product that they put out. So as to whether or not I'm going to love it.
Yeah. Again, for me, it would have to go back to kind of staying true to what the original movie was. Don't steer too far away from it. You can change, like we just talked about. Any actor can come in. I you know, it doesn't bother me who's. I mean, well, I would want you to try to get some good actors. Don't give me first year film students crew, or something like that. By any means, don't give me. You know, maybe, but I could, like, I was sitting there thinking, like, I could see, like, we just talked to, and you just talked about him in the second Judge Dredd, Carl Urban. I mean, I just picked it when I picture this movie. I'm like, Carl Urban is probably somebody I would see in this movie as Voltan, as the bad guy.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you could add more of the elves to it. I think you could up your ante on some of the the character wise and things of that nature. But you know, I don't know who I would pick as Hawk right now, but like I can picture certain things. But I would rewatch it, but don't. This is like one of those movies you don't taint the original.
Yep.
Don't taint the original, even though it's cheesy. And heck, the remake would probably do 10 times better. This is like my wife goes back and watches A Walk to Remember. It's not, it's not a cheesy movie by any means, but it's something that she goes back and watches. And they were just talking about rebooting that the other day, and my wife's like, no. So this is that one where I kind of want to go, no, don't remake it.
If it does well with the limited series run that they're going to do with the comics, I can see it, because that's where there's tons of money being dumped into comic books right now, both from the publishing companies to purchasers, consumers, and everybody is just grabbing properties. So if they decide to start a series, then they have that. If the comic book sells well and it's written, if it's written well, then they are going to, they could have the solid basis for a franchise. Because like you talked about, this was supposed to be a sequel. So this came out at this, in a time where Clint Eastwood was remaking a bunch of foreign films into his spaghetti westerns. Yeah. And that was the goal for everybody, was to start franchises. You had Clint Eastwood, you had Star Wars, you had Indiana Jones, you had Star Trek was going. This was supposed to be along those lines and be at least a 3-movie franchise, and it didn't pan out. And I think it's like you talked about earlier, mainly it didn't pan out because of the whole devil worship and fear thing. And you kind of got to wonder if some of the movies after this, were developed because this franchise didn't explode.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I absolutely. I would like to. Because they were deadpan. They were going to deadpan Star Wars until it actually, because they did. Because sci-fi just didn't work. Science fiction and fantasy did not work in that time frame.
Lucas was turned down by everybody, which is why he started Lucasfilms and decided to do it himself.
So knowing what we know now with Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, what we've seen with The Witcher, Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time that we just talked, the Wheel of Time that we just talked about, and things that we see now. They're bringing some of these back, like we just talked about, Krull, Hawk the Slayer. Some of these movies being made now would probably, I believe, fare better, because knowing what we know now, and D&D is obviously making a huge comeback in lots of media. Tomorrow, if you're a Critical Role fan, tomorrow is the premiere of Vox Machina on Amazon, which I highly recommend that you go check out. It is a animated version of the first campaign of Matthew Mercer and Critical Role. Go check that out. But these things are making comebacks now, and I wonder how these would do now. Again, we've seen how well fantasy is doing on lots of platforms. Disney, Amazon, Netflix, all these platforms. I think they have, a big platform to use these now. Yeah,
I would agree. It's funny you mentioned D&D. I was actually in UPS shipping you a box, and there's 3 young kids, they're still in tech school down here, man. Yeah. And they're just standing in UPS talking about, I'm here, I can't wait to get my boxes. And the kid's like, he said he ordered 73 dice so they could play D&D, and he was like,
that's cool,
waiting behind me so he could get it, because he's got a UPS box and he's just waiting for his order, so they're talking about it. If you were going to make a movie like this, if you're going to do a remake, now's the time.
Yeah,
special effects are at their peak. Interest is at its peak. I mean, the multiple ways that you could create something like this and have it put out there, between one of the big three, Amazon, Disney, or Netflix. It's why not? Why not? And if you present it in a manner where you can do a limited series, I mean, you see that we've got 6 episode series. It's I don't want to say it's too easy, because I mean, obviously it's not too easy, or we'd be flooded with this stuff. But it would be foolish not to attempt it. If you were developing if you were a studio with the ability to develop something like this, I mean, like you said, the foundation is already there. Don't stray too far away from the foundation and bring back, some of these things. Dragon Slayer, Beastmaster. I remember there was I think it was Sci-Fi a long time ago that had a Beastmaster series. Didn't do great. It wasn't horrible, but I mean, it wasn't the original. That was one of my go-tos, man.
My wife is still waiting on a Xena movie, so maybe she'll get that someday. Yeah, I mean, it's there. The platforms are there, and the demand is there. There's definitely a demand for it. In a world where we continue to reboot and redo things, certain things, maybe we need a redo on this one. That's pretty good. So after all is said and done, what is your overall rating of Hawk the Slayer?
Between older Vern and younger Vern, I'm gonna have to settle on a solid 6. I'm gonna give it a solid 6.
That's a good. I'm right there with you. Like I said, this is so bad it's good to me type thing. It is a childhood memory, just like you said. You remembered as a child. I remember as a child, and it holds a special place in my heart. And between old Dash and young Dash, I got to give it a 7. I gave it a 7 just because of nostalgia, and it's a movie I rewatch. Yeah. And I don't have a problem rewatching. So that's pretty cool that again, really, really, really close on our ratings.
And you're right. As far as rewatching it, it's I mean, I rewatched it before we did this, and I wasn't like, man, this is awful. Man, this is awful. I just kind of, watched it and smiled, and like there's specific things you see, and you're like, man, I remember that. You talked about her sticking her staff and blowing silly string on the dude. Like, I was like, I completely remember this. The burial of the dwarf was like something that I will never forget in movies. Where she puts the looks like the giant balloon over his finger.
Yeah, his tomb, or his.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, it was great. It was a good pick because it was nice for a little throwback,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It was nice. So, well, next week we're going to be reviewing and comparing the Arnold Schwarzenegger Total Recall with the I can never remember his name.
Colin Farrell.
Colin
Farrell.
Yeah. Colin Farrell's Total Recall. We'll be watching them, comparing, giving our feedback. So I hope you guys will check back with us next week at this time, 6:30, for Thursday Night Cinema, as we talk about the Total Recalls. Yep. I bet both of us are going to be a little bit different when it comes to this one, because I don't know. I'm curious to see how we compare this. So, any final words on Hawk the Slayer?
If you haven't seen it, watch it. Join our Happy Cheesy Club, and especially some of you all born, in the late 90s. Just look at the greatness that we had back in the day, and it will help you appreciate what you have now, but it'll also show you the creativity of that time.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Go give it a watch. I believe it's all, Tubi. If you got Amazon Fire TV, there's lots of different ways to watch it, rent it. Tubi, I think, has it for free, or IMDb. All of them have it. And I mean, Tubi's great if you want to go watch some old 80s cheesy flicks. I recommend Tubi right away. So, well, from Vern and me, we thank you for coming out tonight. Remember, next Thursday, we'll be here live at 6:30 p.m. talking about Total Recall. So we will see you then, and have a fun night watching movies. We'll see you.
All right.
Later.